Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the Sewing Studio with a viewer request actually this time. And there was a bit of serendipity in this because it was after I did the little mini charm Valentine cushion and I inadvertently sewed a little tuck into one of the seams, and I showed you how to sort of correct that. And we had a viewer that said, actually it would be really helpful if you showed us more of sort of the what not to do's, or if you've done something, how you sort of correct it. And at the same time, I was actually working on some of these checkerboard blocks that somebody had given me in a load of scrap fabrics. Now, the scraps came from all sorts of different places, so I don't know exactly where they came from. But I thought, stop what you're doing, Jeanette, before you've unpicked it all, and just show an example of what can go wrong and what we need to do to fix it. And probably in there as well, why it's gone wrong. So let me first just put this under the close-up so that you can see what I was looking at when I was working with these blocks. Now I'm actually going to focus in on this bit right here. So you can see that on this seam here, it's wildly, it's almost 1/4 of an inch off. Now I should say at this point, this is by no means any criticism of anybody's skill level or sewing. This is purely looking at a potential issue that's happened in sewing and what we need to do to address it. So, you know, I'm going to say this is a safe space of non-judgment. So we aren't judging people's sewing skills at this, but we're almost 1/4 of an inch out. Now, in my mind, as an experienced quilter, I'd be saying, actually, if I'm that far out, there's a bigger problem. There's a bigger problem going on here. So there's two things that we can look at. One of them is our 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and making sure we're consistent and accurate with that. And the other is, have we measured correctly? Have we got that wrong? Because both of those two things can cause this issue. So if it's one of those things, we need to make sure we go back and correct and find out which it is and correct it. So let me turn this over so we can see a little bit more what's happening on the back. And it's a little bit like a little investigation. I was a little like a private detective here, a sewing investigator. Because this also now tells me a story of what was going on for this particular quilter, because we have got lots of inconsistencies within the seam allowance. Now, I am sure that whoever was doing this wasn't that inconsistent with their seams. I think some of this is being done on purpose, and I think it was being done on purpose because they were struggling to get their seams to match. Because if we take a look at this one under the close-up, we can see she's actually done two seams here. I'm saying she, could be a he. They have done two seams, and we're almost at 1 inch here with that seam. So this is saying to me they were struggling to get their seams to match, and so they were adjusting their seam allowances to try to get their blocks to come together and to come out at the right size. Now, if you're having to do that, the first thing I would say is stop. That's never going to end well. You're going to get very frustrated. The problem's just going to snowball. Adjusting seam allowances to try to get things to match this much is never going to work. I mean, I try not to do it at all, but we don't want to start fudging seam allowances because, as I said, it never ends well and we cause ourselves a lot of heartache, a lot of problems. And I suspect this is probably why this ended up in their scrap. She probably got very frustrated with it and just sort of threw the whole thing aside. So what do we do if we've got this going on? We need to stop and we need to have a look. And because I know the seam allowance thing is she's doing this on purpose, to me that says it's a size, it's a measurement thing. We've got something going wrong with our measurements. So if you're using a pattern, just recheck what it says in the pattern that you're cutting to the correct size. And if that is, then you need to check your pieces. So we're going to do that here. I've got a little bit here and there's nothing for it. Sometimes you have to go backwards to go forwards. I'm just going to unpick these blocks here. Now, my sister calls this reversing. I have two sisters, and one of them calls this reversing. And I sort of think of that as a better way. We're just sort of reversing rather than unpicking. I don't know, it just sounds a bit friendlier. And we're just going to unpick these, because as I was working on these blocks and unpicking them, because I couldn't really use them as they were, I realised what the mistake was. And it became apparent as I was unpicking. But to new quilters in particular, like I say, if you've been quilting for a long time, you know, you'll know this. We've all done this at some point, thinking, oh, we'll just adjust, or trim a little bit off here, or, you know, make the seam a little bit wider there. But that way madness lies. So don't be tempted to do it. Right, so I'm going to unpick those. I'm going to take all these little stray bits of cotton out from the seams because we don't want those in our new seams that we're going to sew, and we don't want them certainly poking through our seams. So we're just going to take all of those bits off and out, and then I'm going to take these to the iron and give them a press. And it's a little bit of work, but to be honest, it saves you so much work trying to fudge things later on that you know, to my mind, you might as well just sort of stop and do it. And the sooner, you know, the earlier you catch it. We've all done it where we think, oh, we'll just keep going, it'll be all right, we'll just keep going. It's just like, no, just don't be tempted to do that, just stop. Right, now these should be 2.5 inches, so I'm just going to get my ruler out and measure. Now that one is, I also suspect that this quilter probably didn't have a rotary cutter, because some of these look like they've been cut with scissors. You can never quite get the same straight edge. So I'm just trimming off, and really all I'm doing here is trimming off all the bits that have got a little bit jaggedy around the edge. So you know, you can see there, I mean, that's just literally crumbs, but that has just squared up and neatened up that block. Now let's have a look at this one. Now we can already see, let me put that under the close-up. This is the start of the problem, and this is what I'm saying, these look like they've been cut with scissors. Because if I put that under there, you can see we've undercut here. We've got a whole lot, I'm hoping that's somewhere fairly central. If I put the ruler on top there, you can see that fabric doesn't come to the end there. So that one, I'm not going to be able to use a 2.5 inch square. So I'm going to put that in a pile. I'm going to make 2 piles, the ones that are 2.5 and the ones which are too small. Let's have a little look at this one. This one is close, but we've sort of got the same issue. We're a little bit, I think we could probably use that in there. No, I'm not actually. That's come away by almost 1/8 on that corner. So we've got some inconsistencies with cutting, but I know those little bits, they will add up over the length of a row or over the size of the quilt. But I know there was a bigger problem with this because I've unpicked more of these squares. And if I just sort through some of these, because at some point when this quilter was cutting their squares, let's see if I can find any, they started cutting at 2 1/4. So a lot of the squares, about 1/3 of the squares that I unpicked from the patchwork, from the blocks that I was looking at, and you can see sort of that one. See how sort of jagged that is along that edge. So all of this is going to start throwing you off when it comes to do. So the better we can get, so that's going to go into my not 2.5 inch pile. But I know there was about 1/3 of the blocks, sorry I started saying that were 2 1/4. So at some point, they either sort of measured them wrong or lined up the wrong spot on the ruler, whatever it was. And instead of cutting 2.5 inch squares, they were cutting 2.5 by 2 1/4. And that would certainly account for this being off by this much, because that's your 1/4 inch, and account for why they started having to do these big seams to try to get it to match. So just to recap, the only thing you can do with this, like I say, this quilter, threw it into their scraps. I'm hoping that they sort of tried this again and sort of realised what their error was. But check your 1/4 inch, make sure it's a nice, accurate 1/4 inch, and then also remeasure. Stop, unpick what you've done, remeasure your units, and just make sure everything has actually been cut at the right size. Because sometimes the difference, you can't always see it by eye. But when you come to put it together, your patchwork's going to know, no, that's not going to fit with that bit because they're 2 different sizes. So hopefully that's been helpful. Hopefully all of this frustration, because this must have been so, the whole time I was unpicking this, I was thinking this poor quilter, they must have absolutely been beside themselves with frustration, not figuring out why things weren't coming together and doing everything they thought they could to try to get this to work, you know, to the point where we're trimming little bits off. So we had all sorts of things going wrong really with this, because it started with that slight miscut by the 1/4 inch to 2 1/4 inch instead of 2.5. So if you do this, you know, no, it's not a problem. You're not alone. We've all done it at some point. We all know, actually, we need to just sort of go back to sort of basics and relook at our cutting and our 1/4 inch seam, because most of the things will stem from that. Be kind to yourself. It's a learnt skill, so the more you do, the better at it you become. And, you know, if you do make a mistake, we learn from those, so they're good opportunities to learn as well. So don't be hard on yourselves, be kind, and hopefully you'll enjoy all of your patchwork. So I hope that's the sort of thing that the viewer wanted me to show. Thank you to the quilter who did this, because that did give me an opportunity to share that with you all and hopefully stop some other people making this mistake and, you know, getting this frustration in sort of their patchwork, and get more enjoyment out of your patchwork. So thank you for your time, and I hope you'll join us again here next time in the sewing studio.